You, me, we have drawn circles around ourselves. And those circles are determining how far we push, how far we aim, the things we decide to do. But they are just figments of our imagination. When cultures are strong, new people become the culture. When a culture's weak, the culture becomes the new people. And it's that continual course correction of that compounding curve that's dominating the areas of your life you're not thinking about. If you didn't brush your teeth every day for 5 years, your teeth would fall out. You'd be on a dental chest screaming. And the question becomes, when did that happen?
The frame matters more than the picture. What's that mean?
I think often in life, whether it's marketing or innovation, or when we're building companies or products or making content, we fall into the trap of thinking that the thing we're creating in and of itself is doing all of the work to tell the story. But when I looked at tons of studies, when I looked at Apple's and art galleries, and when I looked at Coca-Cola studies that they did, where they put Coca-Cola in a glass and then Pepsi in another glass, and then did a different study where they showed you which one was which. It's so clear that much of the work is being done in psychology, not in reality. What I mean by that is if we just think about the Apple store, every electronic store you've ever walked into in your life is kind of like a crazy jungle of wires, right? That's how electronics stores always were. What Apple did differently, and which helped them to justify the cost of a $2,000 smartphone, was they gave the iPhone space in the shop. And we intuitively know that real estate is expensive. So the space that the object is given actually pours into the value of the object itself. So in an Apple store, because it has 2 feet either side of it, the frame in which it's presented is telling you that this item in the middle is high value. The context you've always seen that kind of framing in is an art gallery where you have one-off special pieces. The other thing I think is so critical to what Apple do so well is they only show you one of each device and they keep the rest in the back room. If we think about scarcity creating value, things that are perceived to be in limited supply, like pieces of art, whether they're typically one-offs, are seen in higher value. The frame in which you present something is doing so much of the work to communicate the value of the thing within it. And even in the Pepsi Coca-Cola studies, which are super famous from back in the day, people would rate the Coca-Cola drink more highly when it came in the can and you could see what you were drinking. They would say that's the better one. But when they removed the can and told people that the Pepsi was a Coca-Cola, or they had blind cups with nothing written on them, people chose the Pepsi. The frame and the story there are making people believe that something tastes entirely better. So it's not just about value, it's about taste and sense, and really at its core, psychology. There's
a story from Sam Harris that I love, which kind of takes this from the business marketing into the personal development space. And he says, after you finished a workout, CrossFit or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or intervals or whatever, and you're laid on the floor panting, making a sweat angel, you've got the taste of metal in the back of your throat and you're hot and the vision's blurry, everything, right? That sensation, although objectively being quite uncomfortable, your felt sense of it is satisfaction. It's pleasure in a way. It's a very kind of masochistic type of pleasure. But if you spontaneously had that happen while you were sat in traffic, you'd be fucking terrified.
Yeah.
You would ring the ambulance and you would say, I'm dying. This is a heart attack or a stroke or whatever. So the frame that we place around our experience largely determines our experience.
And the question becomes why? So as I talk about a lot from looking at some studies that they did on mice in a maze, where they put chocolate at the end of the maze and then set the mouse off. They scan the brain of the mouse as it's going through the maze the first time, and it's firing like crazy. So much activity in the brain as it's sniffing everything and scratching everything. Eventually it finds the chocolate. The second time in the maze, they scan the mouse's brain, they put it back into the same maze with chocolate at the end of it, and it glides through the maze with no cognitive activity appearing to happen at all. It's gone into autopilot. And like when we think about the amount of cognitive load that the brain would encounter every day, just when I'm in this room, the amount of things that I would have to think about or to save cognitive capacity, tune out of, what we know is the brain is taking shortcuts, and the frame and the anchors around the thing you're looking at provide tons of shortcuts. So even in the case of what I talk a little bit about as well, is if I gave, in these studies, they gave people 3 options. Do you want to go to an all-inclusive trip to Paris or an all-inclusive trip to Rome? And in that study, people go, I want the all-inclusive trip to Paris. But in the second study, they say, do you want an all-inclusive trip to Paris or an all-inclusive trip to Rome, or an all-inclusive trip to Rome without coffee? People suddenly choose the middle option, the all-inclusive trip to Rome. And it's purely because this third option, which has entered the frame, has tricked the mind to think, God, if they removed coffee from the all-inclusive trip to Rome, the all-inclusive trip to Rome must be way better because they haven't removed it from the trip to Paris.
Yeah.
A slight thing. And we see it again on menus and in electronic stores with TVs. And if you go into a steak restaurant and there's 3 steaks, people will typically choose the middle one because the cheapest one and the most expensive one are telling you a story that the cheap one's probably not good. The expensive one's a little bit too bougie. And that middle one, which is anchored in the middle of that frame, is probably the nice, happy medium between the two. And this is happening all throughout our lives. We're taking shortcuts, using the frame to tell us stories of the thing that sits within it. People don't think about the frame. They think about the thing they're creating. But great artists, great innovators, your Steve Jobs of the world, your Teslas of the world, they obsess about the frame because it's hard to check. Like if you think about, we want to make an advance on people's perception of our product, the thing we've created or the content. It's really hard to do that in reality. Like it's really hard, as Roy Sutherland says, to make a train faster or to make an iPhone better.
Correct.
But it's easy to play with the frame to change the story in the consumer's mind.
Yeah, this is where differentiating yourself with whatever you choose to do, people get captured. They obsess over the actual thing itself. Whereas there's all of these other ancillary, extrinsic sort of diffuse differences that you can use. And it's why, I've spent so much money to make this look pretty. Because when people look at this, it's filmed in a different aspect ratio, right? It's not filmed in 16:9. It's filmed in a custom version of CinemaScope, right? It perfectly fits an iPhone. Anybody that's watching on an iPhone now, turn it to widescreen and you'll see that it perfectly fills. There's no bars at the top. There's no bars at the sides. It'll even get cut off by the circle of the bezel of the iPhone. That's how perfectly curated this is for the mobile viewing experience.
Shall I say what I think the most impressive thing that you do is that's so tiny and is actually just 4 characters long?
Hit me.
In terms of the frame, is you write in the title 4K. Nobody cares, right? Objectively, it's not going to change the content, the experience of the content itself. But when you say 4K, it's actually telling a much bigger story. It's actually saying high quality, high production value, and really like the second order thing is they're really worth your time.
Yeah.
We've invested a lot in this. Just 4 characters it's taking in your YouTube title, but it's speaking about the quality of what I'm about to watch. And I think that is probably doing a tremendous work on retention.
Heavy lift.
And it's just, you just write 4K in little brackets.
Yeah.
But it says so much.
Loneliness is a kind of tax we have to pay to atone for a certain complexity of mind.
Yeah. There's 2 things we don't want to be. Not enough and different. That's what a therapist said to me recently that came on my podcast. She said, there's 2 things that fundamentally, I interview billionaires and CEOs and royalty. So she goes, I'm a therapist for billionaires, CEOs and royalty. She goes, the 2 things are that people struggle with fundamentally are feeling different. We don't want to feel different. That's a rejection from one's tribe, which used to mean back in the day through a process of self-preservation. We'd die earlier, as you've heard about in the studies of, that they did at Harvard. We'd get more ill, our immune systems would break down. And the second one is not feeling like you're enough, which means you're not valuable to the tribe. So not being part of the tribe or of good use to the tribe causes a bunch of signals in our body, which then manifest as physiological disease and psychological disease. So at its core, sometimes I think when I'm feeling in that such a way, maybe I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling really different, or I've got some feedback which makes me feel like I'm different in a fundamental way. I just ground myself in the understanding that even the fact that I feel that makes me like everybody else. And in terms of loneliness, I've had to kind of carve out my own new tribe in my life, a very small group of
With Prince
people.
William.
Yeah. No.
But no, moving to Austin was a big part of that for me because I was around. It's a city of cultural immigrants.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody has gone from one place to this place, so that is the selection effect, and that's why again another great way to work out who's high agency in your friend group is: are they living in the same town that they were born up in, or in a new one? Are they living in the same country that they were born in, or a new one? Have they decided to do something on their own and take risks that they were the only people who they were responsible for? In relation to your riddled with fake ambitions thing, this great quote from Alex that says, you've already achieved goals that you said would make you happy.
Yeah.
And that encapsulation of the hedonic treadmill in a single tweet, I think is so interesting.
But it also calls you to reframe what you're pursuing. And this is why the part of the discipline equation, the psychological pursuit, is actually really a nice thing to focus on, because we both know in all of our lives, even the podcasting game you're playing now, there's not a finish line here, is there? Every day is the finish line. So I think it reframes what we're aiming at, because they are mirages that move off into the distance as we approach them.
Yeah.
And if you become you think about unhappiness coming from unmet expectations. If you're too focused on the podium giving you pleasure, when it doesn't, the expectation that it could lead to unhappiness.
What happened when you hit 1 million subs? How did you feel?
I'd sit down my team. I go, I know none of you really care, but the reason why we should celebrate is because, and then I give them the reason. And it's same with 3 million. When we hit 3 million subs, it's the same thing. Walked into the back room of our studio. I go, listen, I know this doesn't actually matter. What matters more was the old lady that came up to me when I went to Penguin the other day and said that, was almost crying in the lobby. That's what we all care about. We care about the Chris Kamara thing where he came on the podcast and his former football club put banners up in the stadium about it. We care about impact. And this is just a trailing metric of impact. So it's important, and I've done a lot of research over the last 10 years about how to build a company in such a way where you don't get those moments of burnout or anticlimax. And Simon Sinek talks about building things as if they are infinite. So how would you set up you and this podcast team through the frame of, we're going to do this for 100 years? Well, you design the system to be sustainable over the long term. You'd aim at consistency. You try and optimize intensity, but not at the cost of consistency. And the whole system of how you treat the people and how everything and how you treat yourself would be set up in such a way. That's what I think about now. I'm actually thinking about our podcast through the lens of, heavily inspired by what Joe Rogan's done, sticking at that for like 15 years. How do we run this game for 50 years? And I think that's a huge competitive advantage, to think through that frame, because there'll be a lot of people that would have designed their systems in a way that is not sustainable. And I see it with podcasters all the time. I see it where they've got 4 mates who are all on the podcast and they're doing it twice a week. Well, then what happens when Jerry, has a divorce with his wife and has to leave? And then the system was never designed for longevity. So all facets of my life, my companies, my teams, all designed for longevity.
90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 3.
Really?
And of the 10% that do, 90% of them don't make it past episode 20. So by making 21 podcasts, you were in the top percentile of all podcasters ever in history.
And how many get past 10 years?
Of fucking hell.
Yeah,
Jesus.
That's the game I want to play. I want to do a 20, 30 year, I say it to my team all the time, multi-decade systems.
Long-term games with long-term people.
So my team can move through the chapters of their life, right? They're going to be fathers and mothers. They're going to get, they're going to have certain moments in their life where they have health risks. And is our system designed to guide them through that, but retain the talent that we want to retain? Is it designed for a changing world that's going to get AI centric? Like, do we have enough fast acting feedback loops so we know when the next thing's coming?
Would you not just slot people in and move people out? Like, the differences and the challenges that you're going to encounter at 10 million subs is going to be different to what you encountered at 10,000 subs. So I don't know, I get that. And there will usually be a core group of people, but really the only core thing is you, right? Ultimately, if you want to start doing stadium Ed Sheeran style productions, the people that did the first Stephen Bartlett tour, they're not the people that can do that, right? You need new people. You need a different cinematography team, and you need people that can do live broadcasts, and they need to be able to do switching on this huge fucking desk, camera 3, camera 4. Like, I don't disagree, but fundamentally what it seems to me it comes back to is, how can you make sure that it's your infinite game? Yes, it trickles down to the rest of the team, but ultimately the team are going to come and go. The only thing that's going to remain is you. Because if you go, it's fucking done. You're not selling Diary of a CEO. Like, Diary of a CEO, now presented by fucking Jimmy Carr. Like, it's not happening.
So in that sentence, there was a key thing I said, which is the talent you want to retain. Mm-hmm. And in building businesses, I built businesses from 0 to 700. I always know that the first phase 1 people, the cult, we call it, it's the cult, the growth, and then the enterprise phase, 3 stages in business. And then you have the decline, which is inevitable for all companies. In the cult phase, the people that can wear multiple hats and that are fired up and sleeping under the desks are not always the people that thrive in the enterprise phase, where there's your job description is very, very narrow. You need to be very process orientated and fit into a bigger system. They're not always the same people, but the people you want to retain that have a decade of information capital in their heads about who we are, the disciples. If you think about Sir Alex Ferguson, there's a reason why he kept Gary Neville on the pitch. And Gary Neville's told me this directly. I've seen the conversation he had with Sir Alex Ferguson where he asked him the question, Gaffer, why did you keep me around like 3 or 4 years after I clearly couldn't kick a ball anymore? And it was because of he knew the culture, he knew the values, and you need disciples. All of those players, all those Man United players said to me, how many times do you reckon Sir Alex Ferguson came into the training ground dressing room in 26 years? I said, I don't know, 2000? They went twice. I go, why? Because my disciples were in there. I didn't need to go in. When cultures are strong, they're self-policing.
Very cool.
When cultures are strong, new people become the culture. When a culture's weak, the culture becomes the new people. So in my teams, I want as many people that were there from the jump if they have the capacity to move through those phases of growth. And the key sentence was the talent I want to retain.
Yeah. You must sweat the small stuff. Why?
I just think it's the most important thing. I remember one of the most important books I ever read was The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson when I was 18 years old, because it helped me understand the importance of marginal gains and the tiny things in life and how they're compounding for or against you invisibly in every aspect of your life. Your teeth, your skin, your finances, your relationship. The tiny things are compounding for or against you. And the analogy I give to help sort of illuminate this is, if you didn't brush your teeth today, no one in this room would know. If you didn't brush your teeth every day
You might.
I might, because I'm in close proximity. If you didn't brush your teeth every day this week, really, a couple of people might notice, but they wouldn't say anything. No real costs. If you didn't brush your teeth every day for 5 years, your teeth would fall out. You'd be on a dental chest screaming. And the question becomes, when did that happen? It happened today. It was that small, seemingly invisible decision, which was easy to do and easy not to do, as they always are, that you chose not to do, that compounded invisibly against you. And as they say in compounding returns, which they call the eighth wonder of the world, according to Warren Buffett, it's slow then it's fast. And that's why it's so difficult and so easy to overlook the smallest things. It's easy to save £1, so it's also easy not to. I believe that most people in any discipline I'm competing in will not sweat the small stuff. They'll overlook the small things, which gives us a great competitive advantage by obsessing over the smallest things. And also, as we talked about earlier, we talked about the frame and how it's really hard to make huge steps forward in reality, but much easier to make them in psychology. It's very difficult to find big steps forward in business. It's very difficult. Like, think about us as podcasters. Is there really like another platform we could go onto? We're both on airlines now, I think. We're both on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Is there like a breakthrough step forward? If there was, we'd all be doing it, right? They're hard to find. Small things, though. I can stack 100 of those and make 100% gain, as Sir David Brailsford said. Yeah. And the unobvious thing that no one thinks about is the psychological impact on a team when you stack small things. This is what we call the progress principle. Harvard Business Review interviewed thousands of people in work and said, when was your most enjoyable day in work? And they all pointed out in their diaries a day when they had a sense of progress, even small, a tiny little gain they made. Sir David Brailsford, who's known for his marginal gains theory and is written about in the first chapter of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, said to me, the small gains, the making the water bottle just a little bit bigger and the pillow softer mattered. But the thing no one gives us credit for, thing no one talks about, is I took over a team that were depressed psychologically. They were down and out. They didn't want anything. And by finding tiny little gains, quote, we felt like we were going somewhere. That psychology of momentum is the greatest force in business. I can tell you in all my companies now, which ones have that feeling of momentum and the impact in 6, 12, 18, 24 months that'll have on their excellence in their work and their delivery in terms of bottom line. And I can point at the companies now that don't have that. I say it's in the air. They don't have the momentum in the air. The collective don't feel like they're going somewhere. The easiest way to jumpstart this, like I said about keeping commitments to yourself, is to go and find tons of small things and share them with the group. And Sir David Brailsford said to me, we started finding all these small things, and what you'd find was people were staying till 2 a.m. because we were in the shops making the tires a little bit bigger, and people were fired up. We felt like we were going somewhere.
How do you apply this to your personal life?
The small stuff. I just see this. It goes back to what we said about letting the demons in. I see the small things that I do as they're all compounding for or against me. So this morning, when my girlfriend got out of bed and walked out of the room, I remember thinking, like, we've developed a habit, and we're developing a habit now where we don't interact first thing in the morning. We
don't say good morning to each other.
We used to always. This sounds a bit soppy or whatever, but it's the truth. When we first met, when we woke up, we'd cuddle just for a bit. We're kind of tired, we'd cuddle. We moved out of that. And I can see, if I just zoomed out over the last 3 years, how our behavior, like our interactions in the morning, are just veering off. So this morning she got out of bed and she was walking off, and I go, hey, come back. I said, let's have a cuddle. And we laid in bed for about 20 minutes and just cuddled. That's that subtle course correction, which they talk about in aviation. Was it the 61-1 rule? Where for every 60 miles you fly, if you're 1 degree off target, you'll miss the airport by 1 mile. that need for, that's also why the small stuff is so important. It's that continual course correction of that compounding curve that's dominating areas of your life you're not thinking about. And if I just give you that lens of every area of your life, your relationship, your health, your teeth, your skin, your money is subtly compounding in one direction based on the tiny decisions that you're choosing to make or not make. And the way that you can change that trajectory over the next 10 years is by saving that pounds, brushing your teeth, taking care of that relationship, checking in with that friend. And if you zoom out and you look at Warren Buffett and how he made his millions, it's all that. It's all this obsession with the compounding returns, which he calls the eighth wonder of the world.
So his business partner, Charlie Munger, says the first rule of compounding is never interrupt it unnecessarily.
Yeah.
So this is the other side, right? You must sweat the small stuff, but when you are sweating the small stuff, stop fucking about with it, right? Are you on a path? It's the same for me. Like a lot of the questions and stuff that we've had over the last year is like, what are you going to do next? What are you going to change? What's the next project? A big part of me is like, everything is so vertical, like line go up and to right, which I know that you know the feeling of. I really don't want to touch too much. This doesn't mean that we're not looking at different ideas. You've got this is a different way of shooting things. It's in a much smaller room. We're actually trying some different angles. We're shooting on different cameras, blah, blah, blah. But it's not a massive change, right? The first rule of compounding is never interrupt it unnecessarily. And so many people, I think because there is an allure in the novelty of doing something new, like, oh yeah, maybe I'll try. Like, I'm sure I could start a fucking VC firm or some bullshit, or like start it with a friend, or like be like, Stephen, like how should I begin to do this thing? It's like, look, one thing, the thing that you've said is already most important is going up and to the right. Stop fucking about with it, right? Okay, the compounding is on your side.
So it's temptation is highest when we're unsuccessful and when we're successful. It's not high in the middle. Because when we're unsuccessful, there's so much luring us away. My mother started 25 businesses before the age of me being 25 because when her business was struggling, someone would walk in and tell her that estate agents down the road are making loads of money. So my mum literally started an estate agent. She couldn't access the internet. She couldn't read or write. So she started that. And then someone walked into the shop 6 months in and said, warehouses that do furniture down the road are selling lots of money. So I watched my mum start 25 different businesses at that. And then at the top, let's look at the top. So when things are going really well and temptation's optimal as well. If you think about the biggest podcasters in this country previously, I won't name them because I don't want to, but the thing that took them off their throne was diversion. Even True Geordie the other day did a tweet where he said, somewhere along the way, I lost track of what my job was, which was to give value to my audience. London Real.
Fucking hell.
He changed his YouTube channel to run for mayor, and he posted, at times it looked like 30 iPhone videos a day.
Still the same.
Temptation was high. The temptation of becoming London mayor. So I think when I'm at optimal temptation, focus.
Stop fucking about.
Focus. Don't interrupt the process, as Charlie Munger would say.
It already existed before I came up with it, called the Einstellung effect. So the successful, deliberate approaches that we learn during our development can become a prison which stops us from being more free-flowing and at ease when we are developed. The tools that got you from 0 to 50 are not the same ones that get you from 50 to 90 or 90 to 95. But we found success with this approach in the past, so we cling on to an overly rational, deliberate approach. We hope that applying pure cerebral horsepower to a situation will fix it, without realizing that our subconscious has aggregated the thousands of hours of experience that we've clocked up now. And not using that experience is keeping us in the same league we've always been in.
It's so interesting. It's a prison you've built around yourself that you don't know is there. And I reflect on that video. Have you ever seen that video of the ant and the pen?
No.
They get an ant on a piece of paper, plain A4 piece of paper. And the guy on YouTube, it's like got millions of views on YouTube, just with a biro, draws a circle around the ant. And the ant runs to the edge of the circle and believes it's trapped. And it will not cross that line. It will not cross that line. Looking down on it from a bird's eye view, you go, oh no, it's just a figment of its imagination. They do the same with a spider. They get a piece of paper, there's a little spider on it, they draw a circle around it with a biro. It will not cross that line. As the guy's drawing the circle smaller and smaller, he accidentally draws it so close to the spider that the spider steps over the biro, and then it can never, ever in its life be trapped by the biro again. And you watch it just run off the page, and he's trying to trap it again, and it can never, because it realizes that that's just a wall it's built in its mind. And I reflect on that always in my life and go, There was this time I was in Boston and I was running on a tread machine, and I always do 10 kilometers on this tread machine. And when I do 10 kilometers, I get this physiological signal that I'm tired, like my muscles break down. I landed in Boston. I've got a talk later that day. The tread machine doesn't have the kilometer dial on it, so I can't see how fast I'm running. So I think, okay, I'll do it the other way around. I'll wait for the signal in my body telling me I'm tired, and then I'll get off. I run and I run and I run and I run. I run and I run and I run. I'm like, I'm not getting tired. I keep running. I look up at the time. I'm like, I'm going to have to get off this treadmill at some point. I hit the button, 21 kilometers. And I was perplexed, absolutely perplexed. Every time I run 10 kilometers, I feel knackered. I ran 22 when I couldn't see the thing, and it was just a limiting belief, a wall I'd built, and I told myself that that was my limit. And we have drawn circles around ourselves, and those circles are determining how far we push, how far we aim, the things we decide to do, but they are just figments of our imagination.
Have you seen, there was a study, very famous study, where they put rats into water and they let them tread water to see how long they would do it until they just gave up. So first iteration of the study, they put rats in, and I think they last around about 30 minutes, something like that, not long. Second iteration of the study, new rats, obviously, unfortunately. Rats go in for 28 minutes, then they pull them out, they dry them off, and they let them calm down. Then they put them back in, and they tread water for like 12 hours, right?
Really?
Because their belief is, I'm going to be safe. And that's learned helplessness, right? You'll have heard about the dog where it pushes the button to stop itself from being electrocuted on the floor. It's the same sort of thing. But yeah, I do wonder, where are the lines that are drawn around us, that we've drawn around ourselves? And especially since moving to America, my ambition has changed so much. I don't have a massive amount of ambition intrinsically, or I didn't. And then I start to hang around with guys like Bill Perkins, right? Or Rogan, or Mark Normand, or people that are really like moving very, very quickly. And it's like through fucking osmosis, man. You just can't not start to have bigger goals and dreams. And it's scary. It's scary when you realize, especially for me, because I know what it's like to not have ambition. I don't, not that it doesn't come from me, but for some reason I hadn't lit the fire that went underneath it. And then after a little while, you realize, oh, hang on a second, like this is really fucking potent. Like,
and it's compounding for you.
Yeah.
On that point about the limitations we both have that we probably don't realize are there, the best place to always search, I think, is in the labels we've given ourselves. Like, what do you label yourself as when you introduce yourself?
Podcaster.
Yeah. And if you think about labeling theory, what we said earlier about grades or telling kids certain things, that is building a wall around you in your own mind that you're a podcaster. And this happens in all of our lives. The last thing we achieved becomes the identity that we embody, and it traps us in a cage. So I'm super careful all the time, especially when I left my last marketing company, to not define myself with a particular label, because I would become the label. I would act in service of the label and move in that direction. You are not a podcaster. In fact, like, podcasting wasn't even a thing when you were born, so how can that be who you are? You are someone that is curious, and this is what I mean by like resisting the labels. You are curious, you like intellectual conversations, you like self-improvement and forward motion. And if those are your labels, think about all the things you can apply that to. Business and creativity, and you're doing shows soon, right? And I think that's a free, and you look at why people get midlife crises when they hit, 40 years old, when they look at, how the hell did I get here? I'm working in the city. Well, you embodied a label and lived that label for 15 years, and it wasn't even something you particularly enjoyed, you were just good at it. That resisting of labels, I think, is so important for long-term happiness. So part of the reason why I went and worked in psychedelics, part of the reason why I did the musical, learned to DJ, wrote the books, because I don't see myself as anything. I don't see myself as social media marketing CEO. Social media didn't exist when I was born. There must be something more fundamental to who I am. And it's staying attached to that and resisting at all costs society's temptation to put you in a box so we understand you and we understand where you fit. Don't get in the box.
It's more difficult at a cocktail party. But yeah, I understand. I know. I don't disagree. I like
entrepreneur because it's broad. It means you create stuff.
Creative, writer, etc.
All those things are great.
Yeah.